The morning sun cast long shadows across Naval Base Coronado as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her black sedan. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of military service, but today felt different. Today, she would be taking command of SEAL Team 7's training program, a position that had never been held by a woman in the unit's 40-year history. Sarah adjusted her service dress blue uniform, the gold oak leaves on her collar catching the California sunlight. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen combat and lived to tell about it. She had earned every promotion, every commendation, and every scar that marked her journey to this moment. As she walked toward the training compound, Sarah could feel the weight of history on her shoulders. She had graduated top of her class from the Naval Academy, served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a helicopter pilot, and completed advanced tactical training that rivaled any special operations program. Her record spoke for itself, but she knew that wouldn't matter to everyone she was about to meet. The SEAL training facility buzzed with activity as she approached. Young recruits, fresh-faced and eager, moved through morning exercises under the watchful eyes of instructors. These were the hopefuls, the ones who dreamed of earning the coveted trident pin that marked them as Navy SEALs. Most would wash out before completing the grueling program, but those who remained would become part of an elite brotherhood. Sarah paused at the entrance to observe the scene. A group of 12 recruits was running obstacle courses while their instructor, a grizzled chief petty officer with arms like tree trunks, shouted encouragement and criticism in equal measure. She recognized the type immediately. Old school Navy, probably been training SEALs since before she graduated high school. "You call that climbing, Martinez? My grandmother could scale that wall faster, and she's been dead for 10 years. Chief Petty Officer Tommy Rodriguez bellowed at a struggling recruit. The other trainees snickered, but quickly focused back on their own challenges when Rodriguez's steely gaze swept over them. Sarah made her way to the administrative building where she would officially assume command. The hallways were lined with photographs of SEAL teams past and present, their faces serious and proud beneath their military headgear. She had studied many of these photos during her preparation for this assignment, learning the history and tradition she would now be responsible for upholding. Captain James Morrison, the outgoing commander, was waiting for her in his office. A tall, distinguished man in his early 50s, Morrison had led the training program for 3 years and was transitioning to a position at the Pentagon. His desk was clean except for a few personal items he was packing into a cardboard box. "Sarah, welcome to Coronado," Morrison said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm, his smile genuine. "I've been looking forward to this transition. Your reputation precedes you." "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here and ready to continue the excellent work you've established," Sarah replied, maintaining military courtesy despite knowing Morrison well enough to speak casually. Morrison gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "I won't lie to you, Sarah. This assignment comes with unique challenges. The SEAL community is traditional, and change doesn't always come easily. But I've seen your file, and I believe you're exactly what this program needs." Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty. "I understand the concerns, sir. I'm not here to revolutionize anything overnight. I'm here to train the best warriors our Navy has ever seen." "That's exactly what I wanted to hear," Morrison said, pulling a manila folder from his desk drawer. "Let me brief you on the current class. We have 32 candidates who started Hell Week 3 months ago. They're now down to 18, which is actually above average retention for this point in training." He opened the folder and slid several photographs across the desk. Sarah studied the faces of young men who had already proven themselves capable of extraordinary endurance and determination. Each photo was attached to a detailed profile, including academic scores, physical fitness ratings, and psychological evaluations. "Your biggest challenge won't be the recruits themselves," Morrison continued. "It'll be some of the instructors. They're good men, excellent at their jobs, but they've never answered to a female commanding officer. Chief Rodriguez, in particular, has been here longer than anyone. He knows every tradition, every unwritten rule, and he takes the responsibility of shaping future SEALs very seriously." Sarah had expected this. Military culture, especially in elite units like the SEALs, changed slowly. "I'll earn their respect through my actions, not my rank," she said. Morrison smiled. I knew you'd say that. It's exactly why you were chosen for this position. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. You should know that word of your appointment has already spread through the base. Some are curious, some are skeptical, and a few are openly resistant. And the recruits? Sarah asked. They're focused on survival right now. Hell Week broke most of their preconceptions about what they thought they could endure. They'll follow strong leadership regardless of who provides it. Morrison returned to his desk and picked up a small wooden box. This belonged to the first commanding officer of this training program, Captain William Anderson. He established many of the traditions we still follow today. He opened the box to reveal a simple brass compass. It's been passed down to each commander as a reminder that our job is to guide these young men toward their true north, becoming the warriors their country needs. Sarah accepted the compass with appropriate reverence. The brass was worn smooth from decades of handling, and she could feel the weight of tradition it represented. I'll honor this responsibility, sir. The sound of running feet and shouted commands drifted through the open window. Morrison glanced outside, and then back at Sarah. Your first real test will come this afternoon. The recruits are scheduled for water confidence training, and Chief Rodriguez will be evaluating their performance. It's a critical phase where we typically lose several more candidates. What exactly does the test involve? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew from her own military experience. They'll be bound hand and foot and dropped into the pool. They need to swim 50 meters underwater, surface, and tread water for 5 minutes while maintaining military bearing. It tests not just physical ability, but mental toughness and water confidence under extreme stress. Sarah nodded. She had undergone similar training during her own military career, though nothing quite as intense as SEAL standards. In my role, you'll be observing and making final determinations on any borderline candidates. Chief Rodriguez will recommend who should be dropped from the program, but the final decision is yours. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. These young men had sacrificed everything for the chance to become SEALs. Their dreams, their futures, their very identities were tied to successfully completing this program. The decisions she made would shape not just their lives, but potentially save or cost lives in future combat operations. Morrison gathered the last of his personal items and stood. I'll walk you through the facility and introduce you to the key personnel. After that, you're on your own. They spent the next 2 hours touring the training compound. Sarah met instructors, support staff, and medical personnel who would be crucial to her success. Each introduction carried its own subtext. Some welcomed her warmly. Others maintained professional courtesy while clearly reserving judgment, and a few made no effort to hide their skepticism. Chief Rodriguez was conducting weapons training when they found him. He was explaining the proper care and maintenance of the M4 carbine to a group of attentive recruits. His voice carried the authority of someone who had used these weapons in combat and lived to teach others. Chief Rodriguez, Morrison called out as they approached. I'd like you to meet your new commanding officer. Rodriguez turned, and Sarah got her first close look at the man who would be her most important subordinate and potentially her greatest challenge. He was shorter than she had expected, perhaps 5'8", but built like a fortress. His arms and chest strained against his utility uniform, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in sun and salt water. Ma'am, Rodriguez said, snapping to attention and rendering a crisp salute. His voice was neutral, professionally correct, but Sarah detected no warmth behind his dark eyes. Chief, I'm looking forward to working with you, Sarah replied, returning his salute. I understand you've been the backbone of this program for many years. 15 years, ma'am. Seen a lot of candidates come and go. His response was clipped, economical with words. Morrison interjected. Chief Rodriguez has the highest success rate for Hell Week completion of any instructor in SEAL history. His methods are unconventional, but they work. I look forward to learning from your experience, Chief, Sarah said, meaning it sincerely. Rodriguez nodded curtly. Permission to continue with weapons training, ma'am? Granted, Chief. As they walked away, Morrison lowered his voice. Rodriguez lost his son in Afghanistan 2 years ago. The boy was Army infantry, died in an IED attack. Since then, he's been even more intense about preparing these recruits for what they'll face downrange. Sarah felt a stab of sympathy. She understood the weight of loss, the way it could drive someone to push harder, demand more, refused to accept anything less than perfection. Thank you for telling me. That context helps. They continued the tour, visiting the medical facility where docs would monitor recruits for signs of dangerous exhaustion or injury. The mess hall, where proper nutrition was carefully calculated to maintain the candidate's strength, and the barracks where the remaining 18 recruits slept when they were allowed. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant toward the horizon when they returned to the administrative building. Morrison gathered his packed boxes and prepared to leave. One last piece of advice, he said as they shook hands goodbye. Trust your instincts. You've got more combat experience than most of the instructors here, even if it wasn't with the SEALs. These recruits need leaders who understand what real warfare demands. Sarah watched Morrison's car disappear through the base gates, and suddenly, she was alone with the full weight of command settling on her shoulders. She returned to her new office and sat behind the desk, looking out at the training grounds where her recruits were preparing for the afternoon's water confidence test. The next few hours would set the tone for everything that followed. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and prepared to face whatever challenges awaited. She had trained her entire career for moments like this, and she would not let doubt or tradition stand in the way of doing her job. The pool complex at Naval Base Coronado was designed for one purpose: to separate those who merely wanted to be SEALs from those who possessed the mental fortitude to actually become one. The 50-meter Olympic-sized pool glittered under the afternoon sun, its depths concealing challenges that had broken stronger men than those who stood on its deck today. Sarah arrived at the facility 15 minutes before the scheduled test, wanting to observe the setup and get a feel for the environment. The pool deck buzzed with activity as instructors prepared equipment and medical personnel positioned themselves at strategic points around the water. This wasn't just training, it was a carefully orchestrated test of human limits. Chief Rodriguez stood near the diving boards, checking his stopwatch and consulting a waterproof clipboard. His weathered face showed the concentration of someone who had overseen this particular trial hundreds of times. Every detail mattered when lives hung in the balance. The 18 remaining recruits filed onto the deck in perfect formation, their faces betraying nothing of the anxiety Sarah knew they must be feeling. These young men had already survived weeks of punishment that would have broken ordinary people, but today's test represented a new level of challenge. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe both the recruits and the instructional staff. She noticed several other base personnel had gathered in the observation area. Word had clearly spread that the new female commander would be making her first major evaluation decisions. Gentlemen, Chief Rodriguez's voice carried across the deck like a bullhorn. Today you will demonstrate water confidence under combat conditions. In real operations, you may find yourselves compromised, bound, and forced to survive in hostile water environments. The recruits stood at attention, their eyes fixed straight ahead. Sarah studied their faces, looking for signs of fear, determination, or resignation. She had learned during her own military training that the mind was always the first thing to break under pressure. Rodriguez continued his briefing. You'll be secured with military-grade zip ties at your wrists and ankles. You will then enter the water and swim 50 meters underwater to the far end of the pool. Upon surfacing, you will tread water for 5 minutes while maintaining military bearing and answering questions from instructors. One recruit, a tall blonde kid who looked like he belonged on a college football team rather than a military base, swallowed hard. Sarah made a mental note of the reaction, not necessarily disqualifying, but something to watch. Failure to complete any portion of this exercise results in immediate dismissal from the program. Rodriguez announced matter-of-factly. Medical personnel are standing by, but understand this. If you panic, if you give up, if you ring the bell, there are no second chances. The bell Rodriguez referenced sat on a post near the pool entrance, a brass ship's bell that had become the symbol of surrender for SEAL candidates. 3 rings meant voluntary withdrawal from the program, the end of dreams, the acceptance of defeat. Sarah had seen the statistics. More candidates rang the bell during water training than any other phase. Rodriguez gestured to his assistant instructors. Petty Officer Williams will demonstrate the proper technique. A muscular Hispanic man stepped forward, extending his hands behind his back. Another instructor secured his wrists with black zip ties, then moved to bind his ankles. Williams moved to the pool edge with an awkward shuffle, paused for a moment to control his breathing, then dove cleanly into the water. Sarah watched as Williams descended below the surface, and began swimming toward the far end of the pool. His movement was fluid despite the restraints, using a dolphin-like motion to propel himself forward. The pool deck fell silent except for the gentle lapping of disturbed water. 30 seconds passed. 45. At 1 minute, Sarah began to feel the collective tension of everyone watching. At 1 minute 15 seconds, William surfaced at the far end of the pool with barely a splash, immediately beginning to tread water with perfect form. Outstanding demonstration, Petty Officer Williams, Rodriguez called out. Note the controlled breathing, efficient movement, and immediate transition to treading position upon surfacing. Williams maintained his position for the full 5 minutes, answering questions about combat scenarios while keeping his head above water. When the exercise was complete, he swam to the side where instructors helped him from the pool and cut his restraints. Any questions before we begin? Rodriguez asked the recruits. Silence. These young men had learned that questions were often interpreted as signs of weakness or lack of confidence. Very well. Johnson, you're first. Recruit Johnson stepped forward, a compact, dark-haired young man from Ohio whose file indicated he had been a competitive swimmer in college. If anyone should succeed at this challenge, it was him. Sarah watched as Johnson's hands were secured behind his back, followed by his ankles. He moved to the pool edge with obvious confidence, took 3 deep breaths, and entered the water smoothly. But something went wrong almost immediately. Johnson's stroke rhythm was off, hampered more than expected by the restraints. Sarah could see him struggling to maintain forward momentum as he descended toward the bottom of the pool. At the 20-meter mark, his movements became erratic. He's in trouble, one of the medical personnel murmured, moving closer to the pool edge. Johnson's head broke the surface at the 30-meter mark, gasping for air. He had failed to complete the underwater portion of the test. Johnson, return to the starting position immediately. Rodriguez commanded. The recruit swam back, his face flushed with embarrassment and exhaustion. As he climbed out of the pool, Rodriguez was waiting with the clipboard. Johnson, you failed to complete the minimum requirements, Rodriguez stated flatly. Report to the administrative office for out-processing. Sarah felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. Johnson's file indicated he was an excellent candidate in every other measure. Top physical fitness scores, high intelligence ratings, strong leadership potential. But the water confidence test was non-negotiable in SEAL training. Chief, Sarah called out, stepping forward. I'd like to speak with recruit Johnson privately. Rodriguez's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded. Yes, ma'am. Sarah motioned for Johnson to follow her to a quiet area away from the other recruits. The young man's face showed the devastation of someone watching his dreams collapse in real time. Johnson, tell me what happened in there, Sarah said quietly. Ma'am, the restraints were tighter than I expected. I couldn't get my rhythm, couldn't maintain depth. His voice cracked slightly. I've been swimming competitively since I was 8 years old. I don't understand what went wrong. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of dishonesty or excuse-making. She saw neither. In combat, equipment fails. Conditions change. Plans fall apart. The question isn't whether you'll face unexpected challenges. It's how you respond when they come. Johnson nodded, understanding the lesson embedded in her words. I'm going to give you one more chance, Sarah continued. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because a good leader needs to understand the difference between failure and a learning experience. You'll go last today after watching every other candidate complete the evolution. The relief and gratitude in Johnson's eyes was immediate. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet, Sarah warned. If you fail again, you're out. No appeals, no second chances. As they returned to the pool area, Sarah noticed Chief Rodriguez watching their interaction with obvious disapproval. She would need to address that later, but for now, the evaluation needed to continue. Stevens, you're up, Rodriguez called out. The next recruit, a stocky young man from Montana, approached the restraint station with determination. Stevens had grown up on a ranch, and his file indicated he was accustomed to physical hardship and problem-solving under pressure. The restraints were applied, and Stevens entered the water with less style than Johnson, but more determination. His underwater swim was methodical, powerful strokes propelling him steadily forward. He surfaced at exactly the 50-meter mark and immediately began treading water. Stevens, what is the maximum effective range of an M4 carbine? Rodriguez called out. 500 meters for point targets, sir. Stevens replied, while maintaining perfect treading form. What is the proper procedure for treating a sucking chest wound? Cover the wound with an occlusive dressing, monitor for tension pneumothorax, and prepare for needle decompression if necessary, sir. Stevens completed his 5 minutes flawlessly, earning a rare nod of approval from Chief Rodriguez. The afternoon continued with mixed results. 3 more recruits passed without difficulty, demonstrating the water confidence and mental toughness that separated SEALs from ordinary warriors. 2 others struggled, but ultimately succeeded, their determination overcoming technical deficiencies. Then K. Martinez, the recruit Rodriguez had been criticizing during the morning obstacle course training. Martinez was small for a SEAL candidate, maybe 5'6" and 140 pounds, but Sarah had noticed his file indicated he possessed unusual endurance and pain tolerance. Martinez approached the restraints with obvious nervousness. His hands shook slightly as the zip ties were applied, and Sarah could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool ocean breeze. Martinez looks like he's already beaten, one instructor muttered to another. Sarah ignored the comment, focusing instead on the young man's face. She recognized the look, not fear of failure, but determination to prove doubters wrong. She had worn that same expression many times during her own career. Martinez entered the water awkwardly, his small frame disappearing beneath the surface with barely a splash. For several seconds, there was no movement, and Sarah began to worry he had panicked underwater. Then, Martinez appeared, swimming with a technique unlike anything Sarah had seen before. Instead of fighting the restraints, he had somehow adapted his stroke to work with them, using his legs in a scissor kick that propelled him forward while his bound hands provided minimal guidance. He reached the 50-meter mark with time to spare, surfacing smoothly and immediately assuming the treading position. His breathing was controlled, his posture perfect. Rodriguez began his questioning, but this time his tone carried a grudging respect. Martinez, you are operating behind enemy lines when your team is compromised. You have wounded teammates and limited ammunition. Describe your tactical priorities. Martinez answered while maintaining perfect water position. First priority is casualties, sir. Stabilize the wounded and establish secure perimeter. Second priority is communication. Attempt to re-establish contact with command and request extraction. Third priority is movement to predetermined rally point while maintaining noise and light discipline. You encounter enemy patrol between your position and the rally point. Your options: assess enemy strength and patrol pattern, sir. If possible, avoid contact and bypass. If engagement is necessary, establish fields of fire and use superior positioning to achieve tactical advantage. Rodriguez continued questioning for the full 5 minutes, covering everything from demolitions procedures to medical emergencies. Martinez answered every question correctly while treading water with the efficiency of someone who belonged in the ocean. When the exercise was complete and Martinez was helped from the pool, Rodriguez made a notation on his clipboard that Sarah suspected was significantly more positive than his earlier assessments of the recruit. The testing continued through the afternoon, with results that reflected the harsh realities of SEAL selection. 12 candidates passed completely, 3 failed outright, and were immediately dismissed from the program. 2 passed marginally and would require additional evaluation. Finally, it was Johnson's turn again. The pool deck had grown quieter as the afternoon wore on, but now the tension was palpable. Everyone present understood this was a second chance that rarely came in SEAL training. Johnson himself looked different, more focused, less anxious, as if watching his classmates had taught him something crucial about the exercise. The restraints were applied with extra care, and Johnson spent longer at the pool edge, controlling his breathing and visualizing his approach. When he entered the water this time, the difference was immediately apparent. Johnson had learned from his earlier mistake. His stroke was shorter but more efficient, working with the restraints rather than fighting against them. He maintained perfect depth control, hugging the bottom of the pool as he powered toward the far end. At the 40-meter mark, Sarah could see he was struggling with oxygen debt, his movements becoming less fluid. For a moment, she thought he might surface early again, ending his SEAL aspirations permanently. But Johnson pushed through the discomfort, drawing on reserves of determination that hadn't been apparent during his first attempt. He touched the far wall of the pool at exactly 50 meters and surfaced with controlled grace. His treading was textbook perfect, and when Rodriguez began his questioning, Johnson's answers came clearly and confidently despite his obvious exhaustion. "Johnson, your team leader is unconscious, and you are in command of a compromised mission. Your orders were to secure a high-value target, but intelligence indicates the situation has changed dramatically. How do you proceed?" "Reassess the tactical situation with available intelligence, sir. Determine if the mission can be completed safely with current resources. If not, request new orders from command while maintaining security of the team." Rodriguez nodded approvingly and continued with increasingly complex scenarios. Johnson answered each question while maintaining perfect water position, proving that his earlier failure had indeed been a learning experience rather than a fundamental inability. When the 5 minutes elapsed and Johnson was helped from the pool, the normally stoic Rodriguez actually smiled. "Outstanding recovery, Johnson. That's what we call learning from failure." As the recruits were dismissed and equipment was secured, Sarah found herself both exhausted and exhilarated. Her first major evaluation as commander had been more complex than she anticipated, requiring not just adherence to standards, but judgment calls about human potential and second chances. Chief Rodriguez approached as she was reviewing the day's results. His expression was unreadable, professional, but carrying undertones she couldn't quite identify. "Ma'am, permission to speak frankly?" "Granted, Chief." Rodriguez glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Giving Johnson a second chance, that's not how we usually operate." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand that, Chief. But good leadership sometimes means recognizing when someone deserves an opportunity to prove they can learn from failure. In combat, there are no second chances, ma'am. That's exactly why we need to identify people who can adapt and overcome when things go wrong," Sarah replied. Johnson failed his first attempt, learned from watching others, and succeeded when it counted. That kind of mental flexibility could save lives downrange. Rodriguez considered her words, his weathered face thoughtful. "I've been doing this for 15 years, ma'am. Seen a lot of candidates, a lot of commanders. Most stick to the book. And you think I should stick to the book?" "I think," Rodriguez said slowly, "that maybe sometimes the book needs someone willing to write new pages." Sarah felt a small surge of satisfaction. It wasn't exactly approval, but it was progress. As she walked back to her office that evening, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had made decisions that some would question, shown flexibility that might be seen as weakness, and demonstrated leadership in a way that differed from her predecessors. But as she looked out at the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon, Sarah felt confident she had done the right thing. These young men were training to become America's most elite warriors, and that required more than just adherence to rigid standards. It required the kind of adaptive thinking and moral courage that could only be developed through experience with both failure and redemption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her leadership, and their resolve. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had begun to earn the respect of her subordinates, and had made decisions that reflected both the high standards of SEAL training and the kind of judgment that would serve these future warriors well in the complex realities of modern warfare. The sun was setting over Coronado as Sarah finally headed home, carrying with her the weight of command and the knowledge that every decision she made would shape not just individual careers, but the future effectiveness of America's most elite fighting force. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's first major evaluation, and the rhythm of SEAL training had settled into a grueling routine of physical punishment, tactical instruction, and mental conditioning. The 18 candidates who had survived water confidence training were now down to 14, with 4 more having rung the bell during night navigation exercises that tested their ability to function under extreme stress and sleep deprivation. Sarah had established a daily routine that began before dawn, reviewing training schedules, medical reports, and individual candidate assessments. She made it a point to observe every major training evolution, understanding that her presence sent a message to both instructors and recruits about what she considered important. This particular morning brought news that would test every aspect of her leadership skills. Admiral Patricia Hayes, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, was arriving for an unscheduled inspection of the training facility. Admiral Hayes was a legend in naval aviation, one of the first women to command a carrier strike group, and someone whose opinion could make or break careers. Sarah was reviewing the day's training schedule when her assistant, Petty Officer Rebecca Santos, knocked on her office door. "Ma'am, Admiral Hayes is requesting an immediate meeting with you and Chief Rodriguez. She's in conference room A." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Unscheduled visits from flag officers rarely brought good news. "Do you know what this is about, Santos?" "No, ma'am, but her A mentioned something about program integrity and maintaining standards." Sarah straightened her uniform and headed for the conference room, her mind racing through potential issues. Had someone complained about her decision to give Johnson a second chance? Were there questions about her leadership style or qualifications? Admiral Hayes was studying training photographs on the conference room walls when Sarah and Chief Rodriguez entered. The Admiral was smaller than Sarah had expected, perhaps 5'5", but she commanded the room with a presence that reminded Sarah why this woman had risen to the highest levels of military leadership. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, Chief Rodriguez, please sit," Admiral Hayes said without preamble. Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am," Sarah replied, taking the indicated chair across from the Admiral. Rodriguez sat beside her, his usually confident demeanor showing signs of tension. Admiral Hayes opened a manila folder and consulted several documents before speaking. "I'm here because of complaints that have reached my office regarding changes to established training protocols." Sarah's heart sank. Someone had indeed reported her decision about Johnson, and now she would need to defend choices that might be seen as undermining the rigid standards that made SEAL training effective. Specifically, Admiral Hayes continued, "I've received reports that standards are being compromised, that candidates who should be eliminated are being given special treatment, and that the integrity of the selection process is being undermined." Chief Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably beside Sarah, but she kept her expression neutral and waited for the Admiral to continue. "I've also received reports," Admiral Hayes said, "that under your leadership, this program is producing candidates with higher psychological resilience scores, better adaptive thinking capabilities, and stronger leadership potential than any class in recent memory." Sarah blinked, surprised by the unexpected direction of the conversation. Admiral Hayes closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "So, I'm here to understand what exactly you're doing differently, because whatever it is, other training commands want to implement similar approaches." The relief Sarah felt was quickly replaced by the realization that she needed to articulate a training philosophy she had been developing intuitively rather than systematically. "Ma'am, I believe SEAL training should absolutely maintain its high standards, but we also need to ensure we're developing warriors who can think independently and adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations," Sarah began carefully. "Go on," Admiral Hayes prompted. "Traditional approaches sometimes eliminate candidates who demonstrate exactly the kind of innovative thinking and resilience we need in modern warfare. My goal is to maintain physical and mental standards while also identifying those candidates who show potential for growth and adaptation." Chief Rodriguez spoke up for the first time. "Ma'am, if I may, the Lieutenant Commander has been requiring candidates to demonstrate not just compliance with standards, but understanding of the principles behind those standards." Sarah glanced at Rodriguez, grateful for his unexpected support. Admiral Hayes made a note on her legal pad. "Give me a specific example." Sarah thought back to recent training evolutions. "Last week, we had a land navigation exercise where recruit Martinez chose to deviate from the assigned route when he identified what he believed was a more tactically sound approach. Under traditional evaluation, that would be considered failure to follow orders. And how did you handle it?" "I required him to explain his reasoning to the instructing staff. His analysis was sound. He had identified potential ambush sites along the prescribed route and chosen an alternate path that provided better security while still reaching the objective on time." Instead of punishing initiative, Chief Rodriguez added, "We used it as a teaching moment for the entire class about the difference between following orders and applying tactical judgment." Admiral Hayes nodded approvingly. "And your failure rate?" "We've eliminated 6 candidates in the past 3 weeks, ma'am, all for legitimate deficiencies in physical performance, mental resilience, or character issues. But our retention rate for qualified candidates is actually higher than the historical average. Because," Chief Rodriguez interjected, "we're spending more time developing potential instead of just weeding out weakness." Admiral Hayes stood and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds. Sarah could see the current class conducting small boat operations in the bay, tiny figures maneuvering rubber rafts through choppy waters under the watchful eyes of instructors. The nature of warfare is changing rapidly, Admiral Hayes said without turning around. We're fighting enemies who don't follow conventional rules, in environments that require split-second decisions based on incomplete information. We need SEALs who can think as well as fight. She turned back to face Sarah and Rodriguez. What I'm seeing in your psychological evaluations suggests you're developing exactly those kinds of warriors. Sarah felt a surge of validation, but Admiral Hayes wasn't finished. However, I need to address the specific complaints that brought me here. There are concerns that you're being too lenient, that candidates who would have been eliminated under previous leadership are being retained. Ma'am, every candidate currently in the program meets or exceeds all established standards, Sarah replied firmly. I haven't lowered any requirements. But you have changed how those requirements are applied, Admiral Hayes observed. Second chances, additional evaluation periods, alternative assessment methods. Sarah nodded. Yes, ma'am. When I believe a candidate has the potential to meet standards, but needs additional development time or different training approaches, I provide those opportunities. And you're confident this approach doesn't compromise program integrity? Chief Rodriguez answered before Sarah could respond. Ma'am, I've been training SEALs for 15 years. I was initially skeptical of the lieutenant commander's methods, but I've seen the results. These candidates are not only meeting traditional standards, they're exceeding them in areas that matter most for modern operations. Admiral Hayes returned to her seat and opened the folder again. Dr. Patricia Williams, the base psychologist, has submitted a report on psychological resilience metrics for your current class. Would you like me to share her findings? Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied, though she felt nervous about what might be revealed. Your candidates are scoring an average of 15% higher on stress tolerance tests, 20% higher on creative problem-solving assessments, and 25% higher on leadership potential evaluations compared to the past 5 classes. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and relief. The numbers validated her instinctive belief that treating these young men as developing warriors rather than just candidates to be eliminated was producing better results. Dr. Williams attributes these improvements to what she calls constructive stress application, challenging candidates in ways that build capability rather than just testing limits. Chief Rodriguez smiled slightly. The lieutenant commander has been requiring candidates to explain their thinking during failed evolutions, then giving them opportunities to apply lessons learned in subsequent training. Traditional approach would be immediate elimination for failure, Admiral Hayes noted. Yes, ma'am, Sarah acknowledged. But if we eliminate every candidate who makes a mistake, we lose potential warriors who could develop into exceptional leaders given proper guidance. Admiral Hayes consulted her notes again. Tell me about Recruit Johnson. Sarah's stomach tightened. Johnson's second chance had been the most controversial decision she had made, and she suspected it was the primary source of complaints about her leadership. Johnson failed his initial water confidence test due to technical difficulties adapting to the restraints, Sarah began. However, his file indicated exceptional performance in all other areas, and I assessed that his failure was due to inexperience rather than fundamental inability. So you gave him a second chance? Yes, ma'am. I required him to observe the remainder of the training evolution, learn from other candidates' techniques, then repeat the test. And his performance on the second attempt? Outstanding, ma'am. He not only passed, but demonstrated the kind of adaptive learning and mental resilience we want in SEAL operators. Admiral Hayes made another note. Dr. Williams specifically mentioned Johnson in her report. She indicates his psychological profile shows remarkable growth in confidence and problem-solving ability since that incident. Sarah felt another surge of vindication. Her instinct about Johnson had been correct. However, Admiral Hayes continued, several instructors have expressed concern that word of second chances could encourage candidates to view initial failures as acceptable. Chief Rodriguez spoke up again. Ma'am, we've been very clear with all candidates that additional opportunities are earned through demonstrated potential and learning, not given automatically. If anything, the candidates are working harder because they understand that exceptional performance is required to receive consideration for additional training. Sarah added, every decision I've made has been based on careful assessment of individual potential and consultation with instructing staff. I haven't created a pattern of automatic second chances. Admiral Hayes closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, your approach represents a significant departure from traditional SEAL training methodology. Change in military culture, especially in elite units, requires careful consideration of both benefits and risks. Sarah waited, unsure whether she was about to be commended or relieved of command. Based on the psychological assessments, performance metrics, and feedback from both candidates and instructors, I'm directing that your training modifications be documented and considered for implementation across all SEAL training facilities. Sarah felt a rush of relief and excitement. Thank you, ma'am. However, Admiral Hayes continued, this also means increased scrutiny. Your methods will be closely monitored, and any degradation in overall program standards will result in immediate return to traditional protocols. Understood, ma'am. Admiral Hayes stood, indicating the meeting was concluding. Chief Rodriguez, your support for these changes is noted and appreciated. Institutional change requires buy-in from experienced personnel like yourself. Ma'am, the Lieutenant Commander has earned my respect through her knowledge, judgment, and commitment to producing the best possible warriors for our Navy. As they prepared to leave, Admiral Hayes addressed Sarah directly. You should know that resistance to your appointment came from multiple sources, both within and outside the SEAL community. Some of that resistance was based on legitimate concerns about change, but some was based on prejudice about women in leadership roles. Sarah nodded, having suspected as much. Your success here doesn't just validate your individual capabilities, Admiral Hayes continued. It opens doors for other qualified women who want to serve in similar roles. That's both an opportunity and a responsibility. I understand, ma'am. I'm honored to have the chance to serve in this capacity. Admiral Hayes shook hands with both Sarah and Chief Rodriguez. Carry on with your training mission. I'll be interested to see how this class performs during their final evaluations. As the Admiral left, Sarah and Chief Rodriguez walked together toward the training grounds where their candidates were preparing for afternoon combat conditioning exercises. Chief, thank you for your support in there, Sarah said. Rodriguez shrugged. I just told the truth, ma'am. You've proven yourself through your actions, not just your rank. They paused to watch the 14 remaining candidates conducting equipment checks before their next training evolution. These young men had no idea their training program was being used as a model for potential changes across all SEAL facilities, but Sarah could see in their bearing and confidence that they were developing into exactly the kind of warriors the modern Navy needed. You know, ma'am, Rodriguez said thoughtfully, when I first heard we were getting a female commander, I'll admit I had concerns. About my qualifications? Sarah asked. About change in general. I've been doing this job the same way for 15 years, and it worked. But watching these candidates develop under your leadership, I'm starting to think maybe change isn't always a bad thing. Sarah smiled. Sometimes the best way to honor tradition is to build on it rather than just preserve it. As they watched the candidates move through their pre-training preparations, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her first day at Coronado. She had arrived focused simply on proving she could do the job, but now she understood her role was much larger. She was helping to shape the future of SEAL training and, by extension, the capabilities of America's most elite warriors. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant across the Pacific as Sarah and Chief Rodriguez headed toward the training area. There were still hours of work ahead, more candidates to evaluate, and more opportunities to refine the training methods that were already showing such promising results. But for the first time since taking command, Sarah felt truly confident that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The emergency alarm shattered the pre-dawn quiet at Naval Base Coronado, its urgent wailing bringing personnel running from barracks and administrative buildings. Sarah was already dressed and reviewing training schedules when the alarm sounded, but the specific sequence of tones made her blood run cold. This wasn't a drill. She reached the command center within minutes, finding Chief Rodriguez and several other senior staff already assembled around the communication equipment. The base communications officer, Lieutenant Mark Shun, was coordinating with multiple agencies while monitoring several radio frequencies simultaneously. What's the situation? Sarah demanded as she entered. Ma'am, we have a real-world emergency, Chin replied without looking up from his equipment. Civilian yacht in distress, approximately 12 nautical miles off Point Loma. 3 adults and 2 children aboard, taking on water rapidly in heavy seas. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Coast Guard response. Coast Guard cutter is responding, but they're 40 minutes out due to weather conditions. Helicopter rescue is impossible. Winds are gusting to 60 knots with zero visibility. Chief Rodriguez was already studying maritime charts spread across a nearby table. Ma'am, our candidates are scheduled for small boat operations training this morning. They're already suited up and conducting equipment checks. Sarah understood immediately what Rodriguez was suggesting. The SEAL candidates have been training for weeks in small boat operations, learning to navigate treacherous waters and conduct rescue operations under adverse conditions. They possess the skills and equipment to attempt a rescue, but using trainees for a real-world emergency mission was unprecedented and dangerous. What's the exact position of the yacht? Sarah asked Chun. Bearing 270 degrees, 12.4 nautical miles from Point Loma Lighthouse. They're anchored but dragging toward the rocks at Sunset Cliffs. Sarah studied the chart, calculating distances and timing. The yacht was in an area she knew well from her own military training. Treacherous waters where powerful currents and hidden rocks had claimed dozens of vessels over the years. Engine status on the yacht? She asked. Engine compartment is flooded, ma'am. They have no power and their emergency radio is failing. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Every minute of delay increased the likelihood that the yacht would be driven onto the rocks, making rescue impossible and virtually guaranteeing casualties. Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah with the maritime chart. Ma'am, our candidates could reach that position in 20 minutes using the RIBs, rigid hull inflatable boats. They've been training for exactly this kind of rescue operation. Sarah felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. These were still candidates, not fully qualified SEALs, but they possessed more maritime rescue training than anyone else available. The decision she made in the next few seconds could save 5 lives or cost even more. What's your assessment of candidate readiness for a real-world operation? She asked Rodriguez. Ma'am, they've exceeded all training standards for small boat operations. Martinez, Johnson, Stevens, and Williams are particularly strong in rescue techniques. Sarah made her decision. Alert the candidates for immediate deployment. Brief them that this is a real emergency, not training. I'll coordinate with base command and the Coast Guard. Rodriguez nodded and headed for the boat operations area at a run. Sarah turned to Lieutenant Chun. Give me a direct line to the Coast Guard cutter. I need to coordinate our response with theirs. Within minutes, Sarah was speaking with Commander Rebecca Torres, captain of the Coast Guard cutter approaching from the south. Torres was initially skeptical about using trainees for an emergency rescue, but quickly understood the tactical situation. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, if your people can stabilize the yacht and keep it off the rocks until we arrive, we can handle the evacuation, Torres said over the radio. Understood. My candidates will attempt to establish a towing position and maintain the yacht's position until you can assume control. Sarah left the command center and ran toward the boat operations facility, where she found organized chaos. 14 SEAL candidates were conducting pre-mission checks on 2 RIBs under Chief Rodriguez's supervision. Their movements efficient and professional despite the obvious tension of knowing this was no longer training. Recruit Martinez was checking rescue equipment, while Johnson verified navigation instruments. Stevens and Williams were coordinating with the boat crew chiefs about approach routes and emergency procedures. Sarah noticed that the candidate's demeanor had shifted completely. Gone was any sense of this being an exercise. These young men understood lives hung in the balance. Listen up, Sarah called out, bringing all activity to a stop. You're about to participate in a real-world rescue operation. A civilian yacht with 5 people aboard, including 2 children, is in immediate danger of grounding on rocks off Point Loma. The candidates formed up in front of her, their faces showing the gravity of the situation. Your training has prepared you for this moment, but understand that this is not a drill. Every decision you make, every action you take, will have real consequences. Lives depend on your performance. Martinez raised his hand. Ma'am, what are our rules of engagement? Sarah smiled grimly at the question. It showed these candidates were thinking like operators, not just rescue personnel. Your mission is rescue and recovery. Use whatever means necessary to save those people, but remember you're representing the United States Navy. Conduct yourselves accordingly. Chief Rodriguez stepped forward with laminated cards showing the tactical situation. Weather conditions are severe, but within your training parameters. Approach from the southeast to avoid the worst wave action. Establish towing position. And maintain yacht stability until Coast Guard arrival. Johnson asked, "Ma'am, if the yacht is taking on water faster than we can stabilize it, then you get those people off that boat and onto ours, whatever it takes," Sarah replied without hesitation. The candidates nodded understanding, their faces showing the determination that had carried them through weeks of brutal training. Boat 1 will be command vessel, Rodriguez announced. Martinez, Johnson, Stevens, and Williams, plus Petty Officer Davis as crew chief. Boat 2 will be support and backup rescue. Sullivan, Parker, Chun, and Anderson, plus Petty Officer Kumar as crew chief. Sarah watched as the candidates loaded into the boats with practiced efficiency. Their movements showed the confidence that came from weeks of training in these exact conditions. But she could see the added intensity that came from knowing this was real. The ribs launched into heavy seas that would have been challenging even for experienced operators. Sarah watched from the operations center as the boats disappeared into the gray morning mist, their powerful engines fighting against waves that were running 8 to 10 feet. Lieutenant Chun provided constant communication updates as the boats made their way toward the distressed yacht. Boat 1 reports visual contact with the yacht, he announced after 15 minutes. Yacht is listing heavily to port and appears to be dragging anchor. Sarah grabbed the radio handset. Boat 1, this is base command. Describe the tactical situation. Martinez's voice came back clearly despite the background noise of wind and engines. Base command, yacht is approximately 40 feet in length, taking on water through damaged hull plating. 5 souls on board visible on deck, including 2 small children. Yacht is dragging anchor and approximately 200 meters from rocks. Boat 1, what's your assessment of rescue options? There was a brief pause before Martinez responded. Base command, yacht is too damaged to tow safely. Recommend immediate personnel transfer to our vessels. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. Transferring people between boats in heavy seas was one of the most dangerous operations in maritime rescue, requiring precise boat handling and split-second timing. Boat 1, you're authorized to proceed with personnel transfer. Use all necessary precautions. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah listened to radio communications that demonstrated exactly why these candidates were training to become SEALs. Despite the dangerous conditions, they maintained professional communication while executing a complex rescue operation. Base command, we have successfully transferred all 5 personnel from the yacht, Johnson's voice reported. 2 children and 3 adults are aboard boat 2. All appear to be in good condition, but showing signs of hypothermia. Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief. Outstanding work, Boat 1. What's your current status? Base command, yacht is breaking up and will be a total loss, but all personnel are safe. We're beginning return transit to base. As the boats made their way back to Naval Base Coronado, Sarah coordinated with base medical personnel to ensure proper treatment for the rescued civilians. Ambulances were standing by, and the base hospital had been alerted to expect possible hypothermia cases. When the ribs finally appeared through the morning mist, Sarah was waiting at the pier along with medical personnel and base command staff. The candidates' faces showed exhaustion and relief as they helped transfer the rescued family to waiting medical teams. The rescued family was remarkably composed given their ordeal. The father, a man in his 40s named David Peterson, insisted on thanking each candidate personally before being taken to the hospital for evaluation. "You people saved our lives," Peterson said, his voice thick with emotion. "My children would have died out there if you hadn't come." Sarah watched as her candidates accepted the thanks with the professional humility she had hoped to instill in them. They understood they had done their job. Nothing more, nothing less. After the rescued family had been transported to medical facilities and equipment had been secured, Sarah gathered the 8 candidates who had participated in the rescue for a debrief. "What you accomplished this morning was exceptional," she began. "You demonstrated skills, judgment, and courage under real-world conditions that many experienced operators never face." Martinez spoke for the group. "Ma'am, we just applied our training. You and Chief Rodriguez prepared us for this. But you executed under pressure when lives hung in the balance," Sarah replied. That's what separates SEALs from other warriors, the ability to perform flawlessly when everything depends on your actions. Stevens raised his hand. Ma'am, how do we process what happened? This wasn't training anymore. Sarah nodded, understanding the question. The transition from simulated training to real operations was always jarring, even for experienced military personnel. You process it by understanding that this is exactly why we train so hard, she replied. Every evolution, every exercise, every moment of pain and exhaustion in training exists for moments like this morning. You saved 5 lives because you were prepared. Chief Rodriguez added, Gentlemen, what you did today is already being reported up the chain of command. Admiral Hayes will be hearing about your performance, and it will reflect well on this entire program. Over the following hours, word of the rescue spread throughout Naval Base Coronado. Sarah found herself fielding calls from local media, base command, and even Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters. The story of SEAL candidates conducting a real-world rescue operation was generating significant positive attention for the training program. But more importantly to Sarah, the rescue had validated everything she had been trying to achieve with her training methods. The candidates had demonstrated not just technical competence, but the kind of judgment, adaptability, and moral courage that characterized the finest military operators. That evening, as Sarah completed her daily reports, she reflected on how dramatically her perspective on command had evolved. When she first arrived at Coronado, she had focused on proving she could maintain standards and produce qualified candidates. Now she understood that her real job was developing warriors who could rise to meet any challenge, whether in training or in the real world. The rescue had been successful not just because of the candidates' technical skills, but because of their mental preparation, their confidence in their abilities, and their commitment to the mission. These were exactly the qualities that would make them effective SEALs in whatever conflicts awaited them. As she looked out at the Pacific Ocean where earlier that day her candidates had risked their lives to save others, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She was building something larger than just individual warriors. She was developing leaders who would carry forward the finest traditions of the Navy SEALs while adapting to meet the challenges of modern warfare. The rescue operation would become part of the lore of her command, a defining moment that demonstrated the effectiveness of her training methods and the caliber of candidates she was developing. But more than that, it was proof that sometimes the most important victories happen not in combat, but in a willingness to risk everything to save others who could not save themselves. The graduation ceremony was 3 days away when Sarah received the call that would define not just her career, but the future of women in military leadership. Admiral Patrick Sullivan, the highest-ranking officer at Naval Special Warfare Command, was arriving at Coronado with a delegation that included the Secretary of the Navy and several members of Congress. Sarah stood in her office reviewing the final evaluations of the 14 candidates who had survived the complete training program. 14 out of 32 who had started, a retention rate that was significantly higher than historical averages while maintaining standards that were actually more rigorous than previous classes. Chief Rodriguez knocked and entered without waiting for permission, something that had become routine after months of working together. Ma'am, you need to see this, he said, holding a manila envelope marked with official Navy SEALs. Sarah opened the envelope and found orders that made her heart race. She was being promoted to full commander and reassigned to the Pentagon as Director of Special Warfare Training Innovation. The position would make her responsible for training standards across all Navy Special Operations units. Congratulations, ma'am, Rodriguez said, though his expression showed mixed emotions. You've earned it. Sarah read through the orders carefully. The promotion was effective immediately following the graduation ceremony, and she would be expected to report to Washington within 2 weeks. Chief, these orders indicate you're being promoted to Senior Chief and assigned as my deputy in the new position. Rodriguez's weathered face broke into a genuine smile. I was hoping you'd notice that part, ma'am. Admiral Sullivan apparently believes our partnership has been effective. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Admiral Sullivan himself. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, came the Admiral's familiar voice. Congratulations on your promotion and your new assignment. Thank you, sir. I'm honored by the confidence you're showing in my abilities. Your abilities have been proven through results, Commander. The training innovations you've implemented at Coronado are being studied by Special Operations Commands throughout the military. Your graduation class has the highest psychological resilience scores and leadership potential ratings in SEAL training history. Sarah felt a surge of pride, not just for herself, but for the candidates who had worked so hard to achieve those results. However, Admiral Sullivan continued, I need to be frank about the challenges ahead. Your new position will place you at the center of significant controversy. There are those who believe women have no place in special operations leadership, and they will be looking for any excuse to prove you're not qualified. Understand, sir. I'm prepared for that challenge. I hope so, because the delegation arriving tomorrow includes some of those critics. Secretary of the Navy Harrison specifically requested to observe your graduation ceremony after hearing both positive reports and formal complaints about your leadership style. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Despite the success of her program, political opposition remained strong. Sir, may I ask the nature of the complaints? Admiral Sullivan's voice carried a note of irritation. The usual concerns about maintaining traditions, questions about whether your methods truly prepare warriors for combat, and, frankly, some people who simply don't believe women can understand what it takes to be a SEAL. And your response to those concerns, sir? My response is that your candidates just conducted a real-world rescue operation that saved 5 lives and demonstrated exactly the kind of capability we need in modern warfare. But you'll need to defend your methods directly to people who have significant influence over military policy. After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly contemplating the magnitude of what lay ahead. Tomorrow's graduation ceremony would be more than just recognition for 14 exceptional young warriors. It would be a referendum on her leadership and potentially on the future role of women in elite military units. Chief Rodriguez had remained in the office during the phone call, and now he spoke quietly. Ma'am, I've been thinking about what you've accomplished here, and I want you to know something. Sarah looked up expectantly. When I first heard we were getting a female commander, I thought it was some kind of political correctness experiment. I figured the Navy was more concerned with appearance than effectiveness. Sarah waited for him to continue. I was wrong, Rodriguez said simply. You've proven that leadership isn't about gender or politics or maintaining traditions just because they're traditions. It's about developing people to reach their full potential while maintaining the standards that keep them alive in combat. Thank you, Chief. That means more to me than you know. Rodriguez stood to leave, then paused at the door. Ma'am, tomorrow when those VIPs are here asking tough questions, remember that every instructor in this facility will be standing behind you. You've earned our respect through your actions. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the graduation ceremony. Sarah arrived at the base early to oversee final preparations and found the facility bustling with activity. VIP security personnel were coordinating with base security, media representatives were setting up equipment, and families of the graduating candidates were beginning to arrive. The 14 candidates themselves were conducting final equipment inspections and rehearsing ceremony procedures. Sarah watched them with profound pride. These young men had been transformed from hopefuls into warriors over the past months, and their bearing showed the confidence that came from surviving one of the military's most demanding programs. At 0800 hours, the VIP delegation arrived in a convoy of black SUVs. Secretary of the Navy Patricia Harrison emerged from the lead vehicle, followed by Admiral Sullivan, 3 members of Congress, and several other senior military officials. Sarah recognized the delegation as including both supporters and critics of her leadership. Admiral Sullivan approached first, extending his hand in congratulation. Commander Mitchell, you look ready for this. Yes, sir, I am. Secretary Harrison stepped forward, and Sarah snapped to attention. The secretary was a former corporate executive who had been appointed to bring business efficiency to military operations, but her knowledge of special operations was limited. Commander, I've heard remarkable things about your program, Secretary Harrison said. I'm looking forward to seeing the results firsthand. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm confident you'll be impressed by these candidates' capabilities. Representative John Crawford, a former Army officer who served on the House Armed Services Committee, was less diplomatic in his approach. Commander, I've received reports that your methods diverge significantly from proven SEAL training protocols. I hope you can explain why changing successful programs was necessary. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Congressman, our core standards remain unchanged. What we've modified are our methods for developing candidates who meet those standards while also preparing them for the complex realities of modern warfare. Before Crawford could respond, the ceremony was called to order. The 14 candidates marched onto the parade ground in perfect formation, their movements synchronized and confident. Family members filled the viewing stands while VIPs took their positions at the reviewing platform. Admiral Sullivan served as the ceremony's keynote speaker, addressing the graduates about their responsibilities as Navy SEALs and their role in defending American interests around the world. His remarks emphasized the unique challenges they would face and the critical importance of the capabilities they had developed during training. When the time came for Sarah to address the graduates, she looked out at the 14 faces that had become so familiar over the past months. These young men had trusted her leadership during the most challenging period of their lives, and she felt the weight of that responsibility. Gentlemen, when you began this program, you came here with dreams of becoming Navy SEALs. Today, you leave here as warriors prepared to face whatever challenges our nation may require of you. She paused, looking directly at each candidate. Your training has been demanding, not because we enjoyed watching you struggle, but because we knew that your future teammates' lives might depend on your capabilities. Every evolution, every test, every moment of pain was preparation for situations where failure is not an option. Sarah gestured toward the families in the viewing stands. The people who love you have supported you through this journey, but now you carry a broader responsibility. You represent the finest traditions of the Navy SEALs, and you must live up to that legacy every day of your service. As the candidates received their SEAL pins and graduated from the program, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Each young man represented months of careful development, and their success validated every controversial decision she had made. Following the formal ceremony, there was a reception where graduates could meet with the VIP delegation. Sarah observed as her former candidates interacted with senior officials, noting how their confidence and articulation impressed even the skeptical representatives. Representative Crawford approached Martinez, who had emerged as one of the class leaders. Son, tell me what you learned from this training that you couldn't have learned through traditional methods. Martinez considered the question carefully before responding. Sir, traditional methods would have taught me to follow orders and meet standards. Commander Mitchell's approach taught me to understand the principles behind those orders and to think critically about how to apply them in unexpected situations. Can you give me a specific example? Yes, sir. During our emergency rescue operation 3 weeks ago, we encountered conditions that weren't covered by standard procedures. But because we understood the underlying principles of maritime rescue and had been trained to think adaptively, we were able to modify our approach and successfully save 5 civilian lives. Crawford nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed by the response. Secretary Harrison spent considerable time speaking with Chief Rodriguez about the training innovations and their impact on candidate development. Rodriguez's endorsement of Sarah's methods carried significant weight given his years of experience and reputation within the SEAL community. Madam Secretary, Rodriguez said, I've been training SEALs for 15 years, and I can honestly say this graduating class is better prepared for modern operational demands than any I've worked with previously. As the reception wound down, Admiral Sullivan approached Sarah with Secretary Harrison and Representative Crawford. Commander, Secretary Harrison began, I've been impressed by what I've seen today. Your graduates demonstrate exactly the kind of capabilities we need in today's military environment. Representative Crawford, despite his earlier skepticism, nodded agreement. Your candidates clearly understand not just what to do, but why they're doing it. That kind of thinking is crucial for the complex operations they'll face. Admiral Sullivan smiled. Commander Mitchell, your promotion and new assignment have been unanimously approved by the Pentagon leadership. You'll be implementing similar training innovations across all special operations programs. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility. Thank you, sir. I'm honored to have the opportunity to serve in that capacity. As the VIP delegation prepared to leave, Secretary Harrison pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. Commander, I want you to understand the significance of what you've accomplished here. You've proven that excellence in military leadership isn't determined by gender, but by competence, judgment, and the ability to develop others. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Your success opens doors for other qualified women who want to serve in similar roles. That's both an opportunity and a responsibility that extends far beyond your immediate assignment. That evening, After the VIPs had departed and the graduates had begun their leave before reporting to operational units, Sarah stood alone on the beach at Naval Base Coronado. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and she reflected on everything that had changed since her first day as commander. She had arrived focused on proving she could do the job, but she was leaving having transformed not just individual careers, but potentially the future of special operations training. The innovations she had implemented were being adopted across multiple commands, and her methods would influence the development of warriors for years to come. Chief Rodriguez joined her on the beach, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thinking about the future, ma'am?" he asked, offering her a cup. "Thinking about how far we've come," Sarah replied. "When I first got here, I thought my biggest challenge would be earning respect as a female commander. And now I understand that the real challenge was developing a new model for training that prepares warriors for modern warfare, while maintaining the standards that keep them alive." Rodriguez nodded. "Those 14 graduates are going to make their mark on the SEAL community. They'll carry forward the lessons you taught them, and they'll probably teach other people what they learned here." Sarah smiled. "That's how progress really happens, isn't it? Not through grand gestures or dramatic changes, but through developing people who understand why excellence matters and how to achieve it." As they watched the sun set over the Pacific, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had accomplished far more than she had thought possible when she first arrived at Coronado. But more importantly, she had proven that leadership transcended traditional boundaries when it was based on competence, judgment, and genuine commitment to developing others. The promotion and new assignment awaiting her would bring fresh challenges, but Sarah felt prepared for whatever lay ahead. She had learned that true leadership meant not just maintaining standards, but constantly seeking ways to help people exceed their own expectations of what they could achieve. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for her new role at the Pentagon, but tonight she allowed herself to savor the knowledge that 14 exceptional warriors were about to join the ranks of the Navy SEALs, carrying with them lessons about leadership, adaptability, and excellence that would serve them throughout their careers. The waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore as Sarah and Chief Rodriguez stood in comfortable silence. 2 leaders who had worked together to prove that innovation and tradition could coexist when both were focused on the same goal: developing the finest warriors their nation could produce.